Why are Christians and Jews coming together like no other time in history?
Genuine Christians who take their Bible seriously are not just not a threat to the Jewish people. These are our best friends.
I actually take very heavy criticism for one reason. I tell every Christian that I ever come in contact with is every Christian needs a rabbi.
The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews presents Journey to Zion with Rabbi Yachiel Eckstein.
Shalom and welcome to Journey to Zion. I'm Rabbi Yachiel Eckstein, founder and president of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, and we're so glad you've chosen to be with us this week as we continue our study on the Jewish roots of Christianity. As with the fellowship, it's our hope that here on Journey to Zion, we can help bring Christians and Jews together, building bridges of understanding through dialogue and by studying the scriptures together. Let's join this week's teaching as I continue on the topic of discovering the Jewish roots of Christianity and today's changing relationships between Christians and Jews. This whole movement of Christians rediscovering the Jewish roots of their faith and the Jewish people as their brother and sister is a recent phenomenon just in the past few decades. And I believe what we are witnessing is the other way as well. It's not just a one-way street. But Jews are realizing for the first time in thousands of years that genuine Christians who take their Bible seriously are not just not a threat to the Jewish people. These are our best friends. The Bible Belt is Israel's safety belt. That Christians are our friends. And I think that this reclaiming of Jesus and of Christians and Christianity that's going on is breaking down the walls of mistrust. I'm sure Christians can understand that if someone comes at you with a hammer and says for thousands of years, buy this toothpaste, and then bangs you over the head and say, buy this toothpaste, you're not going to like the toothpaste. You're not going to like the guy who's hammering you over the head with that. Their marketing tools need a little bit of improving. And you're also not going to like that hammer. In other words, the method with which they were sharing that message of the toothpaste. And for thousands of years, that's how Jews perceive it. If you were to mention to probably the average Jew, maybe not the Jew who's born in the United States in the past 30 years, but one generation before that, if you use the word Christian and ask, well, what is triggered emotionally within you, what we call our tishkas, deep inside, when you say that word Christian, I'll bet that there's a difference. For Christians, when they hear the word Christian, they probably think of the love of God. John 3:16, God so loved the world, he was willing to give his only begotten Son. But if you use those words for many Jews, especially European-born Jews, and especially for Jews who haven't had the interaction that I've had, let's say, with Christians for 30 years, for many of them, deep down, what comes out is fear. It was once said that the pages of Christian history that most Christians never studied or forgot are often the only pages of Christian history that Jews are aware of. Do you get that? That means that if you mention Jesus or Christians or Christianity to the Jew and they look through it from their lens of history, it's not a good track record. And therefore there's mistrust, and there's fear, and there's trepidation, and there's suspicion. And what are you really doing here? Because that's the backdrop with which they see that. There was once this pastor named Ed Flannery who was walking with this Jewish woman, and this Jewish woman happened to have been a Holocaust survivor. And they were walking and talking, and he writes of how they passed at a certain point Elm Street, and he noticed that at a certain point she stopped talking. She was just very uptight. And he thought maybe he said something to offend her, and so he said, did I say something? I really didn't mean to be insensitive. I'm sorry if I said. And she said, no, she wouldn't talk about it. But he kept pushing. What happened to you back there when we passed Elm Street? Finally, she said, well, Pastor, do you remember when we were on that street, there was a church? And you remember that there was a big cross? And he said, yeah. And she said, well, I'm sorry. You're my friend and all, but I have to tell you, every time I see a cross, I shudder. I am afraid. And he asked himself, how could this symbol of love be understood by this Jewish woman as an object of fear? And that's when he started studying the pages of Christian history that he had never studied before, but that were the only pages of Christian history that this Jewish woman was aware of. And so there are stereotypes on the Jewish side, no question about it. There's generalizations. There's sweeping accusations. And that's something that Christians, I think, more and more are patient with and understanding of. But what I see happening over the past 3 decades is that just as Christians are rediscovering their Jewish roots and extending their hand to Jews in love, Jews are extending their hand in response. And what you have is the extension of hands towards one another. Jews are starting to trust Christians because they see that these Christians who take their Bible seriously are genuine, they're sincere, they are extending love to the Jewish people. I have seen how Christians, through our ministry alone, have blessed Israel and the Jewish people in so many ways. Who would have believed that hundreds of thousands of Christians in America would make possible the miracle of Jews emigrating from the former Soviet Union to Israel on wings of eagles? Who would have thought that Jews would owe with gratitude their emigration to Israel to Christians? Do you know who would have thought that? Isaiah. Isaiah did think it. Because Isaiah, a long time ago, before any of us were around, no matter how old we are, Isaiah spoke of a day when instead of persecuting the Jewish remnants of Israel, the Gentiles would lovingly pluck them in their arms and on their shoulders and bring them to the land of Israel. Can you imagine someone in the time of the Crusades, the time of the Inquisition, reading scriptures like that when Christians were persecuting Jews and Jews were totally alone in the world? No friends, probably at that point not even righteous Gentiles. And yet they read that Isaiah said that a day will come when these people will not just not persecute you, but help in the ingathering of your return to Israel. And we're seeing that in our day. There are over 300,000 Jews in Israel today, thanks to the Fellowship's Wings of Eagles ministry. And that's not to toot our horn. It's to toot your horn. It's to toot God's horn, to say with gratitude that His Word said thousands of years ago is true today. And that Jews are becoming so trusting and appreciative of Christians, helping the poor, helping elderly. I just got back from the Ukraine and from Ethiopia, where Christians are helping with food, with clothing, with medicine to elderly Jews, Holocaust survivors. The balm of Gilead being extended by Christians who take their Bible seriously to Jewish people. You know, we Jewish people are a small nation. I know the premier of China, kept reading about the Jewish people in Israel and everything, and once he was asked, well, how many Jews do you think there are in the world? He said, well, probably over 1 billion. Who would believe that in Israel there are just 6 million Jews after these thousands of years? In the rest of the world, there are just another 6-7 million Jews. Not 1 billion, far from 1 billion. And yet, Israel is at the very center of every newspaper every day. What's going on there? And so, clearly, there's something spiritual going on. And on the human level, I think something also is going on, and that is that we are finally finding that we have friends. Now, that may seem like a very innocent statement to many of you, but I cannot tell you how profound that is. That Jewish people are starting to feel, and not everyone, there are still a lot of Jews who are very suspicious, very mistrustful. Why are you supporting it? What's your interest? What's your ulterior motive? What are the conditions do you want back from us? And yet, the love that is being extended by Christians is just love. It's unconditional love. I've come to realize that, and more Jews are coming to realize that as well. We're not used to having friends. We're not used to the Corrie ten Booms, to those who risked their lives. They were always the exception to the rule. People who were willing to actually risk their lives to save Jewish people. I'm not sure if you know of, there was an entire village in France during World War II called Le Chambon. And it was a Pentecostal village headed by a Pentecostal pastor with 5,000 people in. And under the very eyes of the Nazis, the occupying forces, the two pastors there, and I just met a few weeks ago the grandson of one of them, two pastors said, everyone in this community is to take in one Jew, to save one Jew. And so what you had was a situation in Le Chambon where 5,000 Jews were saved because this village and this pastor, these two pastors said, it is our Christian duty to provide refuge, to provide haven, to provide life to these Jews. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. We are witnessing Christians extending their hands not just upward towards God, but across the table to the Jewish people. And we're witnessing the miracle of the breaking down of walls of Jews extending their hands in return. My friends, I think we all realize we're living in very special times. We're witnessing miracles unfolding every day. We're experiencing the drama and seeing the fulfillment of prophecy in our time. And we are both stretching our arms upward towards heaven and towards one another. And that is a day to praise God for and to say, Me'et Hashem haitazot. This is certainly, as King David said, this is certainly of God. It is wondrous in our eyes.